feel like Tina Smith. In fact, I'm happy I don't feel like Tina Smith because she's not feeling well this morning. So I will be sitting in for her. If Kathleen seems to be bossing me around a lot, don't feel bad and think she's a jerk. Thank her because I asked her to. So we'll navigate our way through here. I think we can handle basically the...
And the rest of us boss you around too?
Well, you always do. And so this will be just normal and fun. Okay, so let's work together on this one, folks. So number one, let's see, can we call the meeting to order? Clerk, will you call the roll?
Happy to, Mr. Chair. Mr. Doherty.
Here.
Mayor Brady.
Here.
Mr. Campbell.
Here.
Commissioner Beer.
Here.
Councilmember Hickey.
Here.
And Mr. Ryback.
Here. That being done, let's move to the approval of the agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion and a second, Mr. Chair.
Thank
So
you.
moved. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Wondered.
Very good, we passed that. Approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Thank
Second.
you. You guys are rolling now. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Left the car running.
Opposed? Good. All right. That passes too. We are, see, we're already at number 4. This is an awesome meeting. Okay, so we'll move now to the public comment period. One of the things is we've had this at the beginning of each meeting, and we think it's an important part of many public comments we have. We want to ask people to keep their comments to 2 minutes if we can, so we can get to the issues. And so would anyone like to come forward with public comment? Welcome. And if you could start by giving us your name, that would be helpful.
Sure. Jessie Welsh.
Into the
Jesse, pull the mic over.
Jessie Welsh. I want to speak briefly in support of the I.Alatus project that will come before you today, specifically the high standards of urban design employed by Mr. Lux and his development team, and the way in which they engaged with the public and the city of Rochester to bring forward such a thoughtful project. In my time in Rochester, I have seen a number of projects proposed and approved. I've also seen countless consultants come through with recommendations, guidelines, and suggestions. Very little of this extremely costly work has ever been codified or officially adopted by our city as an ordinance staff can follow. The result is a system with wide variability of quality urban design, left much to the whim of the developer. Then this project came along. Mr. Lux and his team should be applauded for taking the initiative upon themselves to fill 2 large gaps we have in this community: high standards of design and meaningful public engagement. The design work is quite obvious. This project has been thoughtful in how it engages with the surroundings, specifically at the street level. But as a community member, it is the public engagement that really impresses me the most. In Rochester, we've actually created a process that lets developers tell the public, we are here to show this to you because we have to, but know that we don't actually have to listen to anything you say. In fact, our city leaders continue to put in place policies that limit the voice of the public. Yet Mr. Lux seems to know something that many, including our city staff, fail to recognize, and that is developing a project that responds to the needs of the community in which it exists greatly increases the success and viability of the project. In summary, I am very excited to see this project continue to move forward. It should be held as a standard for others to meet. Yet it also shines a light on the fact that we still struggle in this community around putting so much effort into getting public input, researching best practices, exploring cutting-edge design, but not following through on those outcomes. We have all these reports and recommendations and absolutely no one in the community to ensure that we use them. The Stantec report of the Planning Department has been ignored, if not rejected. We have design guidelines that no one really has to follow because they are just guidelines, and we just spent a year doing public engagement around St. Mary's Place, and at this point it sounds as if the city doesn't want to or can't do most of what the community aspires for. What exactly is the point of community engagement if there's no follow-through on what the community wants? We aren't always going to get developers like Mr. Lux. So who is going to be the person in this community or the group who holds these people to high standards? You're involved in such a narrow part of the development in Rochester, but what about the rest of our city? I would challenge you to take up this issue and empower someone within the community to be the enforcer. I think without it, we are going to look back in 20 years and regret some of the decisions we are currently making.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I'm not sure we got your name and further. Do we take addresses here or just name and address? Just name. Okay, name.
Yeah, Jessie Welsh.
Thank you, Jessie.
Yep, thanks.
Thank you very much. Anyone else in public comment? Please state your name for the record.
Hello, I'm Mark Bransford, and I live at 317 15th Avenue Southwest in the Falwell neighborhood. I am here to ask that the I.Alatus project not be approved. A.Alatus claims that they've been respectful of Falwell and are over-improving our street by razzing 5 homes to build a 560-stall garage, which dumps traffic onto our quiet residential street and front lawns, by creating an overly large high-rise that necessitates a massive garage that would intrude deeply into Falwell. There is no step down along 15th Avenue and no transition. There is very little green space, and the boulevard trees will not screen what is clearly a parking ramp, especially at the street level. When you see entry and exit above a big open hole, you know it's a parking ramp. The boulevard trees will not screen what is clearly a parking ramp, nor reduce the massive scale of the building, especially 6 months out of the year when the trees and the landscaping are barren. There is far too much focus on A.Alatus's, Cood's, and Kutsky Park leadership's tunnel vision on how beautiful the development is. Sadly, this puts substance over the reality of what it does to Falwell. It's not next to our little oasis, but steals from it in a way that is damaging and unrecoverable, and which absolutely need not happen if the development were at a sensible scale. They've created an apartment complex that has rents ranging from $1,200 to $3,000, which only the well-to-do could afford. A.Alatus admits that the rents are well above market. With their amenities deck and all the trappings of luxury living, A.Alatus would create a gated community floating above the end of our street. However, it will not house the average Mayo employee who currently drives to St. Mary's in downtown. I'm deeply disturbed and frustrated that the city and DMC are ignoring the strongly suggested height limit in the city-approved 2nd Street corridor plan and the new draft guidelines. Yet when it comes to City Map 19, to further bulldoze homes to make way for a new 3rd Street connecting 15th Avenue and 16th Avenue, official is emphasized, particularly by Mr. Wojcik. Why faithfully follow Map 19, a small piece of the 2nd Street plan, and not follow more generally the guidelines crafted to properly build a city? Because the restricted development process allows for arbitrary and capricious decisions to ignore pieces of plans that have massive public input and buy-in, and to sidestep DMC's very own expensive cookbook. I know for a fact that many in our neighborhood oppose the density and general compatibility of this project, which an online poll clearly indicated. A clear majority oppose many aspects of this development. Sadly, here I'm going to speak from my heart. Perhaps many in Falwell are feeling what we feel, beaten down and worn out. I've done this for 8 months. It's getting hard. Helpless and disgusted with the growing sense of futility of engaging in a struggle to protect our historic neighborhood from a process that's indeed heavily in favor of developers. However, it's important to stand up even when DMC and Mayo back this project, likely making it fait accompli. If you doubt what those in Falwell feel, I have a picture found stapled to a telephone pole ranging from Falwell into historic Southwest, and I can give it to you after and let you look at it.
We're at a couple minutes, and we appreciate your comments, but if you can sort of go to the core and conclude, that'd be great.
Okay. Well, I'll hand this to you and you can look at it, but basically it's a bunch of people running away from bulldozed houses and cranes in the distance. And I'll read this since I don't know who this is, but I'll speak for them. It says, "Welcome to Rochester, Minnesota. It's a nightmare living in Rochester right now. You just never know what crazy project will come up next and what zoning ordinances will be ignored to make it happen. Even if it means losing your home in what you thought was a safe single-family residential neighborhood. It's time to wake up from this nightmare and support a development moratorium until a sensible, comprehensive plan can be adopted." Strong wording, not my words. I'm saying this for those people. However, look at
we're
this.
at 2, so just, you've done a good job now. If you can just wrap it up and we'll be
last
done.
sentence.
Thanks.
Look at this and ask yourself if that's the type of reaction that DMC and Mayo wants from its citizens.
Thank you. Okay, other public comments? Public comments? Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Mary Jo Majerus. I'd like to speak from 2 perspectives, one being a resident of the city of Rochester, and another being a resident of a downtown neighborhood, although not Falwell. I actually don't agree with the last speaker, don't agree with Mark. I think that for the city to continue urban sprawl is both economically and environmentally unsustainable, and I would ask that whatever influence you have on our city leaders, that you use it to encourage infill in all neighborhoods, not just downtown neighborhoods. And secondly, I would like to address the issue of the developer. I've had the good fortune to work with 3 developers now in Rochester recently. 2 in my neighborhood that I live in, and 1 with Mr. Lux, because I am a small business owner and my business is in his property, that Brentwood on 2nd. I'm going to be dislocated for the period of time that they will be, if this passes, that they will be building that building, and then I'll be relocated back in that building. I started going to the neighborhood meetings when I found out that this was going on, because honestly, I wanted to watch him interact with the neighborhood so that I knew who I was dealing with. What I found was a lot of integrity, a lot of honesty, straightforward, no beating around the bush, no trying to mislead people. And I have found that to be true in my personal dealings, my business dealings with him. He listens, he's respectful. I've been amazed at the changes that he's made because of the requests of the neighborhood. I personally, and as a business owner, have a lot of respect for Bob Lux and the A.Alatus project, and would encourage you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Public comments? Welcome. Make sure we can get your name, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Christine Schultz. I'm speaking here simply to give you an update on Heart of the City North project. And that update would be that yesterday evening, the Planning and Zoning Commission voted to deny the incentive development preliminary plan for purposes that they didn't have enough detail to grant incentives. The second item would be to tell you that last week, the HPC voted to forward it to the City Council, the Hotel Carlton Days Inn, as a locally historic property. That will come before consideration at City Council on the January 18th meeting. That would affect the project greatly, so given that, I'd like to give you a little background. As of yesterday, the Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal, Mark Riley said, quote, "A plan to demolish a 1920s-era hotel building in Rochester, Minnesota, and replace it with a 17-story hotel and apartment tower could be derailed if the old site wins designation as an historic site." The quote is true, but in my opinion misses the bigger point. If the developer's plan goes through, if the Hotel Carlton Days Inn is demolished, this Heart of the City proposal will unnecessarily derail goals and visions of the DMCC master plan, which I'll call the plan. Guiding developers is key to what happens within the city now, as discussed at the beginning of this open comment session by Jesse Welsh. Applicants within the DMC Development District seeking city and/or DMC EDA TIF funding should demonstrate they share and are seeking to meet the plan's identified goals and visions. Shared goals and visions require due diligence on the part of applicants to figure out the best ways to do that and to demonstrate that they care about doing that. Consideration of an existing hotel that was identified as a local historic asset in 2014 by the city, included in a map within the DMC master plan approved by the city and your board in 2015, never occurred. To the best of my knowledge, and speaking with the applicant and with everyone I've spoken with, they never truly considered use of this as a boutique hotel on the site. The hotel on the HOC North property compromises approximately 20% of the site. You know, I know, people who travel, urbanists, architects know that it is possible to develop a boutique hotel done all over the country as an anchor to modern development. So I do not know why this has not been looked at carefully. trying to keep this very brief.
Thank you very much.
I think that's it, except that within that plan, the map that was shown in the approved DMCC plan, please note that the Conley mast, now the Blue Duck, was on that document also as a local asset. And in that time period, that building has been refurbished, adaptively reused, put on the National Register, received 40% tax credits, received PACE funding, and done all of the things that in terms of creative reuse of old building stock is perfect for the DMC goals.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Public comment? Please state your name.
John Kriesel, citizen of Rochester, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, and Mr. Mayor. I will make this brief. I will not read this into the minutes, but I would like to distribute something on the behalf of the Rochester Conservancy. I will not go into trying to repeat anything or piggyback on what Christine Schultz had to say, but these are some bullet points that are relevant to the Carlton Hotel. I'm going to switch gears in my train of thought and just say that the Rochester Conservancy, it's very interesting how the citizens of Rochester, on one hand, are encouraged to give their input, but I want to say clearly that there's a price to pay for saying things in the city of Rochester. There are growing numbers of people that are concerned that their voice is not heard, and if they try to express themselves, there's a pushback, a blowback, a price to pay for that. That is very discouraging. For me, at least as a citizen of Rochester, and I think should be for your board. There are growing numbers of people that want the Rochester Conservancy, whether they are elected officials, public officials, or citizens of Rochester, to express their thoughts. Hopefully, all of you will find the time to read through this, pay attention to what Christine Schultz had to say, because the outcome of the landmark hotel, the Carlton, will really decide whether we are authentic or not. And I don't mean to be completely cynical with that word authentic. We've been authentic since the beginning, and that's why the Mayo Clinic is here. And that's why the service to others has been so successful, because the people are authentic, and that's why they live in this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment? Public comment? Please state your name for the record.
Richard Olin, Shoreview, Minnesota. I'm the elevated transit guy, and I know I only have 2 minutes. I have a 3-minute video, but I will hand it out to each one of the members who haven't seen it. And they can take it home on a flash drive and see it at their leisure. I'm worried about the timing of the transit initiative, even though I know there are many people working on this. To think that it'll be the end of 2017 before we have a transit plan when all of the development is going on, I think is going to hinder the effectiveness of a good transit system. An elevated transit system, as you will see in the video, is the safest way. It's also the way that we will get the capacity we need to accommodate 35,000 new employees, and the accessibility that we need for disabled, handicapped, elderly people that have to avoid getting out in 13 below zero weather. They will be able to access it directly from the second floor of all of the buildings that are on the loop. So you will see on my video a 5.5-mile loop from Cascade Park or Cascade Lake parking area, putting in an elevated ramp there and doing the park once idea that's been championed by this group, so that people will be able to move into the center of the city without bringing cars. I think the other thing I just thought of yesterday was, by avoiding putting any more transit on the ground, this will allow the people who want to put bike paths and more walking paths on the ground, because the space is limited. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Public comments? Seeing none, we will move on to the next part. This is the chair's report, and this is the fake chair standing in for the real chair. 2 points that Chair Smith wanted to pass on. And she did want to mention that, Steve, are you here? Where are you here? Steve, he's not here. Okay, well, our city manager, who is probably one of the longest serving in the state of Minnesota, as I believe, the longest? Okay, good. I used to be a politician. We'll just say he's the longest serving city manager in the state of Minnesota. Has announced his retirement, and we're going to have plenty of wonderful kudos we'll be able to give him later in 2017 when it happens. But Chair Smith wanted to note that and wish him the best, but we wish him to keep at work for a while so we can keep moving forward. She also wanted us to note that later in the meeting we're going to get to a part about scheduling, and just the top line point about that we think is important to enforce up front. We are coming up with a schedule next year that will have 2 fewer meetings but more impactful meetings. So instead of having as many convenings, we will have quarterly meetings that hopefully we'll be able to get more done in. So for those of us who are commuting to this, that's helpful. For those of us who want continuity, that's helpful, but that will be coming up later and we can have that discussion. So with those 2 updates, I want to move then on to the project updates and ask Lisa, Patrick, do you want to come forward?
And our city colleagues will join us too.
Great, thanks, Gary.
Good morning, Chair Ryback and members of the board. Thanks for letting us bring forward our updates on the EDA front and the city front. Since our last meeting, we've been reviewing and doing an assessment of 3 projects that have come forward, which have all done formal applications. We are reviewing them against the criteria, of course, that you've set forward for us, that are in the plan, and they're moving through the DMC planning and the city process planning. Today, we're bringing forward, in your packet, is the DMC EDA project report endorsed by the DMC EDA board. This project has been in front of you. The I.Alatus project has been in front of you a couple of times already because we want to make sure that you're tracking with us as we move the projects through the system. After thorough review, we found this project to be consistent with the DMC plan, and we recommend the project for approval. You'll also see in your packet a letter of support from the city administrators. We've worked closely with the city staff, and we are in agreement on this project. Right now, what I'll do is ask Patrick, our Economic Development Director for the EDA, to do a very brief summary of the project and our findings in terms of how we believe it is consistent with the DMC plan, and we're here to answer questions that you might have. We also have the developer in the room and other technical resource experts.
Good. So board, why don't we start with questions of the developer? Are there questions that we want to ask as we move forward? Okay. Okay. Seeing none, should we move to a vote then?
Well,
Mr. Chair.
Mayor,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
go ahead. As I've talked to the developer and we've talked among ourselves, we do need, sooner rather than later, a term sheet on the financing for this project so that we understand it completely and we know that it's there and available and feasible.
My understanding is that this resolution is tied to the financing being secured in January. Is that, can you walk us through that, please?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Patrick Sieb. So it might be useful for us to recall the particular action that we're recommending today, which is action by this board to recognize this as a public infrastructure project as defined by the state law. And our report, which is included in your book, walks through the 6 criteria that are used to evaluate, that we use to evaluate, and that we are reporting with respect to that. One of those conditions is the question is whether or not, in our assessment, this project is financially feasible and financially viable. And I think that's the question that Member Doherty is asking. I just want to be sure that I'm responding to the question that's in front of us.
Could I also put onto that, as I understand this too, then this requires a boundary change. Boundary changes require 60 days, so we don't have that in place. So this is contingent on the boundary change 60-day period going forward in January.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, yes, the boundary change was initiated at your last meeting in October, and will come and is done in partnership with the City of Rochester, and they've done the process that they need to initiate, and it will come before this board at its January meeting with a formal public hearing, which is a part of the process that was built into the state law. So on January 26th, there will be a public hearing. You'll take action on the recommended boundary amendment, which your action today would be conditional on that happening in January.
Okay. Other comments?
Well, this is a project that we've talked about now for quite some time, and I think that the board has been amenable to listening to your recommended adjustments in the project over time. And candidly, we haven't had that many projects come to us in our lifetime. And candidly, we don't have a lot of success in approving projects that get into the ground and start to be built. And so as I look at page 17, it says that the project is $115 million, 34.7 in equity, $69,450,000 of private equity, and $10.5 million of DMC funding. And so I think we're being asked to put up $10.5 million to make this project a reality. And I think I totally support Mr. Doherty's comment that I think if you ask us for approval for this, that there has to be a contingency that we see an acceptable letter of intent for the financing for this project, so that if you ask us to give you the green light to go, that you reciprocate appropriately to tell us that you got the resources to actually do it. We need to see a project designed, approved, and get in the ground and get it started. So I feel strongly about the need to make sure the financing's here for the project.
I actually feel it would be appropriate to ask the developer to comment on that.
Oh, I'm sure he is prepared to do that.
He's in the room.
Representatives from A.Alatus are here. So
Mr. Lux, would you like to move forward and comment on that?
Chair Ryback, members of the commission, my name is Bob Lux. They are good questions, particularly in the time that we're in right now, where we're kind of in transition in the marketplace. It is a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, as you know. A lender won't give you a commitment until you have zoning and until you have the kind of the financial contribution available. Doesn't have to be, no money would be expended. I can assure you that the difficulty in this is not the loan side of it, it is the equity side of it. We do have two sources, as I shared with Commissioner Doherty before this meeting. We have two sources, one of which is, they're both large, institutional equity sources, one of which already has significant holdings in Rochester, knows the market in Rochester, loves this project and loves this location. The other one is a international firm that I have a high degree of confidence in that they would be there if in fact we're not able to get the first one done. So we do have it. The equity would be approximately 35% of the capital stack. And so the debt that we would be looking for is between 60 and 65%, which is a very doable loan. We've been in conversations actually with two of the large banks here in town that have offices in Minneapolis that are both very interested in it. So the yield parameters that we're able to achieve on this are there. As I shared with Patrick Sieb this morning, quite honestly, my only concern at this point is, quite honestly, the construction costs of, we have we believe, a conservative construction budget going into this project. We built a building very similar to this 2 years ago, so we're not going into a blind. But I do have to tell you that Rochester right now is a very tight construction market. So I'm cautious. That would be my only caution. Quite on the financing and the equity side of it, I'm not concerned about.
Okay. Other comments?
Mayor,
Please.
I have several comments on this project. I think overall it's a great project. Financing, I would agree with Mr. Doherty and Mr. Campbell. I might be from Missouri. You need to show me. I mean, it's great that you have the financing lined up, but I need more than verbal assurances. I'd like to see some stuff on paper. So I would concur with Mr. Doherty and Mr. Campbell. As far as the zoning things that we've heard a lot of public testimony, I'd like to just take a step back for a minute and remind the public, especially the people that are here, the purpose, as I see it, as I recall, of our board here is not as a zoning board, is not as a historical preservation board. While I find your public comments on both sides of this terribly interesting, and I do, that's not our job. Our job, that's the city council's job. We all have a job to do here. And I have my opinions on what I may or may not agree with you, the individuals that spoke, but that's not our job here. Our job is about creating jobs, creating a tax environment for tax purposes to better the state of Minnesota. Our job is not to decide what's historical, what's not historical, is a building too high, does it meet zoning codes? So I would, again, it's terribly interesting, but that needs to be at a local level, not for this board. And it just, again, it's interesting, and I have my opinions, but that's not what this board is designed for. We all have a job to do, and our job is to decide on the merits of these projects, all the projects, and whether they contribute to the state, the economy of the state of Minnesota. So I hope I'm making myself clear there. So other than that, this looks to be a good project, but there's still some questions in my mind.
Good. Thank you. Other comments? I have a couple that I wanted to put on top of this. I support this project. I think we should move forward with it. I think it's a strong project, an asset to the city, and I think one of the comments that I thought was important that one of the speakers had was about the idea of Rochester and sprawl. And as someone whose wife grew up in the neighborhood of this project, seeing how much Rochester has spread, I think this gives us an opportunity to have more growth in the city without destroying the context of the neighborhood. And that ultimately, you're right, Mr. Beer, is a local decision, but my gut tells me that this is the right place to add some growth without disturbing context in other places. I have significant issues about the larger impact on development, especially on transit. And so I want to move a staff direction on it. Let me do a couple quick comments to set that up. When we have looked at this project from the beginning, I felt that this was more than anything else, not this development, but this whole destination medical center is a transportation issue more than anything else. That's not new words out of my mouth. That's something that I felt has been important. One of the places that we have said that we could address the transportation issue was actually this block in this district by saying that capturing traffic at the freeway edge instead of having it go into the core of the town would not only diminish traffic, but would allow us to to free up land in the center of town that would otherwise be used by parking ramps. Again, this is not new, but moving forward on this project removes one of the sites that we were considering as potential for peripheral parking. I also believe that's within the context of a neighborhood that has great concerns about traffic in this area. But net, I think it's important to move forward with this project. One more option for addressing transportation is now moving off the table. And a year ago, we had a very robust debate here about a project at St. Mary's in which we were also looking at the fact that in that case, we had no transit solution. We cannot go further without addressing transit. That's not a new point for me, but I feel we need to take an action on that. So I want to move a staff direction that would be worded as such. Direct the city and the EDA staff to explore the feasibility of directing excess tax increment financing from the A.Alatus project to transit and transit-oriented development and refer back to this board on January 26th, 2017. My point in this is to say that right now, the way that we're approaching these projects, and again, I'm supporting moving forward on this, but the way that we're approaching these is in taking the increased taxes we're getting off of them and feeding them back into the development itself and putting nothing into the public realm. My hope is that if we put more of this into the public realm, we could put less into the development. Instead of having these strategies be about a developer and a project, to be about a whole community that we're trying to build. I agree with Mr. Beer's comments that we are not the Historic Preservation Committee, et cetera, et cetera. We are intentionally supposed to use the state funds and tools that we're using to shape a Rochester that can accommodate significantly more growth without destroying the extraordinary character of the city, and we're not going to be able to do that until we move forward on transit. In the transit planning we've had so far, the rub has been that this long-delayed transit plan is put within the context of what dollars we can take out of the EDA pot. The resolution I'm moving forward moves us in another path. It says that we can broaden our scope. We can look at bigger ideas because we could capture greater resources by taking them from the increased taxes coming off the projects. So, for instance, when we look at this project or others coming down the pike, instead of saying the increased taxes go to the project, let's have a bigger vision for transit and now begin feeding it with development funds from that. That's a long way of going about it, but again, this isn't a new context, but I do not want to have one more project go by without us taking a major step toward trying to increase our vision on transit. So, Ms. Lamb, I think what I should do is call the question on the project, if there are no more comments, and then move the staff direction, or should we attach it too?
Mr. Chair, first you need a motion and a second for the resolution,
Yep.
and then if there are any further amendments on the resolution, and then your staff direction.
Okay, so first let me ask, are there other comments from the board?
I would move the resolution.
Okay, so let's move the resolution. Do we have a second?
Would that be subject to appropriate financing disclosure?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. We have a motion in front of us. All those in favor?
Second.
I'm sorry, second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Very good. Okay, I want to move the staff direction. I'd like to read it again. Direct the city and the EDA staff to explore the feasibility of directing excess TIF from the A.Alatus project to transit and transit-oriented development and refer back to the board on January 26, 2017. Let me speak to that for a second. This does not bind us to it, but it binds us to receiving that information at the next meeting and teeing up a discussion on transit.
I want to understand what you're...
Please.
So are we, say the Opus project or the
Yep.
Hamas project, we're putting them in the back seat at this point? I'm not quite understanding
Yep.
what the motion is.
No, thanks for the question. The issue is absolutely not to put any development in the back seat. In fact, I want us to move them forward more quickly. I want us to begin to address the question that's been slowing at least my decision-making, because as you've heard, I keep saying I have trouble voting for this until we have a transit plan, and we can't get a transit plan that fully is visionary unless we know whether we can open up new funds for it. So all this really says is with this project's excess tax increment and with those others. As we're doing the development deals, we should be considering whether we can put some of that into a pot for transit or not. Doesn't bind us to it, but we will be teeing up a discussion at the next meeting about whether this opens up other options for us. Yeah, and in fact, by the way, I just want to state, I think it's incredibly important for us right now to not be putting impediments to development, but moving forward. So the last thing I want to do is slow it. I want to stop having this circular discussion about transit. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is an appropriate discussion to have, and I like the direction that we're sending it to staff for a recommendation. I think that's a good way to go about it. I know the staff takes a hard look at all the tax increment and decides, what portion to dedicate to the development and what to go to the infrastructure projects. So I think this is absolutely a good discussion to have.
Other comments? Okay, moving this staff direction, do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Very good.
Mr. Chair, can I just clarify what the main motion was, subject to the, what I take to be a friendly amendment with respect to evidence of financing? So I just want to repeat that because that'll be a change to this resolution. So it is subject to evidence of financing that is satisfactory to the city and EDA staff? Or do you want it to come back to this board?
I think to this board.
Okay.
The way I understood the motion was this board.
Okay, so subject to, then that evidence of financing will come back to this board?
Yep.
Okay, all right, I just wanted to make it clear what we were passing.
Commissioner Ryback, I think the time period that you need to put on this is longer than January, because if what you're going to do is if you're approving it, that subject to, you're going to have to give us time now to put those financing, get letters of commitments, basically, or letters of conditional commitments. And so what I would suggest is that it's subject to, but it expires at some point. Put a 90-day period on it or something like that so that we have a period of time to go out and...
90 days at the end of
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
That's fine.
Yep.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think just for the
I'm sorry, I'm losing.
public
Jim, go ahead
consumption, we
first.
should probably specify.
Yeah, I'm going to, at the end of this, go back and clarify what we did. Thanks, Jim, because I think it's a really good point, because we're moving quickly on all of this, and we'll untangle this in a second as soon as, go ahead.
Chair Ryback, members of the board, maybe one thing that would help related to this particular issue is in the development assistance agreement that the city has put together with the developer, we have a provision in there, what we refer to as a 90-day shot clock, whereby both parties have to execute that agreement within 90 days of when the city council approves it. Your amendment, Board Member Doherty's proposed amendment probably could follow that particular timeline, I would think. Obviously, the financing of the project would need to be in place, or else it's all going to come back anyway, because that development assistance agreement would be null and void.
That's fine by me.
Okay.
Do you think, or is it your opinion that you can get all the questions raised by the public, the historical preservation and the zoning things that the city council will be able to act? Maybe that's more of a question for Mr. Hickey and the mayor. I mean, there were a lot of questions asked here, and I don't know where they're all going, so.
Just to keep us on track here, Mr. Beer, so the financing issue we've resolved to the satisfaction of the board and players. Okay, so now let's move on to the second point. Go ahead, Mr. Beer.
Okay. So.
Wants to take that.
I can go ahead. It's going in front of City Council.
Sure. Just to let the board know, this item then will be scheduled for this coming Monday evening's meeting, both for its final land use and zoning approval as a separate matter. The establishment will help, the council will hold a public hearing to create the tax increment financing district, and then the city's EDA will act to approve the development assistance agreement between the city and A.Alatus Rochester. And then actually the last piece of action that would occur at the council meeting on Monday evening would be the council's action to approve the boundary modification. As Patrick alluded to earlier, you'll have to hold a public hearing on that at your forthcoming meeting in January. but it requires action by the city prior to that. And so we're taking that to the council as well on Monday evening. And, so the approvals of the TIF district and the development agreement, all that is obviously subject to that approval of the boundary modification by your board in January.
Good. Mr. Newman, I'm sorry, we've moved you to, it's just like Thanksgiving at the kids' table. Why don't we move you back here and come in? Well, let's get you on a mic here and bring you back to the corner table.
The first action the council would need to take is on the land use matters. If they approve the land use matters, then you move on to the other items. So it's a public hearing, and obviously the council has to take whatever action they feel appropriate on the project. So that is the first step. If it gets passed on that, then it moves on to the development assistance agreement and the boundary adjustment. So it'll be in the hands of the mayor and city council on Monday the 19th.
Great. Okay, so we clear? Okay, so we have walked through a resolution and a staff direction, overlaid a couple things. So I think I see consensus, but I want to make sure we're all clear. So first off, the resolution we have passed is the one that is in the booklet with the addition of the finance clause. Could you,
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Lamb, please read that back to us?
With an amendment that was accepted on a friendly basis by the mover, and so the amendment will be incorporated into the written materials. But the amendment would make this resolution specifically contingent upon evidence of financing satisfactory to the board. And the time period would coincide with the time period in the development assistance agreement. And I'll figure out how to word that, but that is the essence of the friendly amendment as I understand it.
Good. We're all clear? Agreement? Good. Okay. And then second, we added a staff direction, direct the city and the EDA staff to explore the feasibility of directing excess TIF from the A.Alatus project to transit and transit-oriented development and refer back to the board on January 26, 17. Okay. So that's what we've done. All clear? Great. Okay. Thank you all. Well, thanks some of you very much. Mr. Lux, thank you very much. Congratulations. We'll see you at your next stop. And let's move back to Lisa and the city staff and
Great,
on
thank
update.
you. Also, there are two other projects we wanted to just touch on. Both projects have been in front of this group before. The two other projects are the Opus Titan project, which we can put up quickly, and the Hamas project. As we continue to move development forward, we are again working through the review process that we mentioned earlier. It's also in your packet, so you can continue to refer to that in terms of what the criteria that we are addressing as we move through these projects. So the review of these projects are going well. Again, the city and the EDA are working closely together. The EDA board to date feels that both of these projects are positive and important for DMC. And to your point, Chair Ryback, we're trying to move these forward for potential approval in the January timeframe so that we can continue the momentum and progress in terms of development. I'm going to ask Patrick again to comment on both of these projects just briefly, but we're not going to go into the details of the project. We just want you to understand that what criteria we are using, if you think we're headed in the right direction, and what the timeline looks like.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I guess I won't make any comments beyond referring you to the screen and the materials in your book. These are two projects. You've heard about them, and we are prepared to respond to any questions that you might have as we are in the early stages of reviewing their applications.
Okay. I also feel that, one of the things we want to do is to keep people informed of all these projects as they're moving through the pipeline. I think we're really learning how to get all these things going. Is there any update on any other projects? The hotel project on the river, for instance, was presented a couple months back. Can you just sort of give us just a top line so everybody's clear on where all this is in the pipeline?
Mm-hmm. That project is also moving forward. We're in discussions with them on more of the details of the project than was presented here earlier. So that project, we hope to make good progress on that in January, and then hope to have that back fairly soon thereafter.
Okay, so just for our planning purposes, we will see these in January. Am I correct? And then see the hotel at the one I just mentioned at our meeting after that?
potentially?
I think likely. I don't know if it can make the January meeting. I doubt that at this point. I think it probably would be the subsequent meeting.
I think one of the things I'm looking for is just for us to signpost for both us and for the community, just so we can always keep in front of us, here's all of what's moving through the pipeline, and just getting a top-line track on that. We don't have to take action each time, but the more we're grounded on where all of this is going, the more we're clear with everyone about that. So, okay. Yeah, please.
I'd agree with that. I actually thought one or both of these projects were going to be before us today for some sort of approval. And I'm not sure I understand why they've been slowed down and we aren't taking action or not taking action on them. But I'm concerned, along with the chair's comment, that we're only going to meet 4 times next year. And I think we need a pipeline that sort of estimates where these projects are and where they are in the approval process within the city, when they're going to come to the EDA board, which in effect moves everything to us. I sort of understand this just a few days before each of these board meetings, and it would be nice to know in that intervening time what's going on, and are there roadblocks in the way, or are they moving forward so they are on our agenda? I think it's really important.
Good. Patrick?
I could comment on that. It really goes to the question that Commissioner Beer asked a moment ago in terms of how confident are we with respect to the I.Alatus project moving through the zoning and approval processes. And as we are doing our review of that project, it is simultaneously going through the city's land use, zoning, and in some cases historic preservation process. And as we present the I.Alatus project, we are quite confident that it has made it through key checkpoints in that process, as well as our own review. The 2 that you see before us are simply not as far along in those processes. A graphic that would be helpful in the future might be these 2 parallel processes that are underway. But imagine on each of these there is a land use and zoning, which is not the purview of this body, except to the extent that if they don't make it through that, the project doesn't proceed in any case. Both of these projects are at the early stages of the land use and zoning. Both were in front of the Rochester's Planning Commission last night for review and consideration and recommendation to City Council. The Heart of the City North, Hamas project also is going to go through a historic review process because it is using a site that has been identified as of potential historic significance. So that has its own review process associated with it. So with that, we are bringing these to you today because we anticipate that they will continue to move forward favorably for potential action in January and be as far along procedurally as the I.Alatus project is today.
Just a tone point to sort of put a bow around this. There are regulatory bodies, a zoning board or whatever, whose job it is to be a neutral arbitrator of development. This is really, we have a function of that, but we are very much about growing the city. We're not neutral on the idea of whether we're happy about somebody building something or we want growth. Yeah. And so, put that in a context of this board and with the idea of if we can possibly get it to the board, with the staff pushing and everybody pushing, I just think we want to encourage you to push. Mm-hmm. And if that requires us to do more, do it. And push us. The idea is we like having more projects coming to this, and so it's a disappointment not to be able to take an action. There are obvious reasons for doing that. I won't talk about those particular projects, but I just want to sort of put that marker down. Make us do our work and get things moving as quickly as we can, and so we can say yes or no or whatever we need. I'm sorry, Mr. Beer.
Yeah, I would echo what Mayor Rybeck has said. We've heard that the construction costs are increasing, especially in the Rochester market, and we just heard of an interest rate hike yesterday. I'm not an economic prognosticator, but push us. Again, I don't want to ram things through without proper review, But at the same time, we got to get going. I mean, and you know how I am. If we need to be pushed, I don't think anybody will be hurt if we need to have an extra meeting or we got to do something a little bit out of the norm. The idea is we want some economic development happening here. So push us, please. If this board can do anything, we're willing to do it. If we can assist in any regard. Again, I'm not trying to ram things through, but we've got enough projects here in the queue. Everybody's busy, so.
Okay. Other comments? Okay, very good. Thank you. Please keep going then to the sub-district update.
Gary?
The next item is the Chateau Theater report. I'm going to defer to Mayor Brady. He's the chair of the group and it's working on that.
Thank you. In our booklet today, we've got Chateau Theater reuse, and it's pretty complete. I think, Patrick, did you put this one together for us? Thank you. We've had the information came back from the architectural firm, and based on multiple interviews with the public as to the desire for that building to be multi-purpose, and I think what they've shown us so far is certainly that. The idea that it could be, I think one of the features of that is the floor of the theater in there that has the capability of being flat for dinners or functions like that, and also with a touch of a button in 30 minutes to be able to change it to a rake floor for theater. And having to be able to do that, it would be a facility that could be used not only multiple days, but probably during a day, multiple different uses, because afternoon you could be one thing, evening it could be something else. So we're really excited about that, and that company is going to be coming forward with additional information, but we're moving ahead on that, and it's exciting to see what will happen. And when I talk about the heart of the city, to me, the Chateau Theater is the heart of that whole area. So we've done some minor things of making sure, just one seems simple, but changed all the light bulbs on the marquee to LEDs, which saves us a lot of money. Got additional rebate for it, and you don't have to be changing them every other week because they last a long time. Repainted it, doing some other work on that, but pretty excited to have that reuse proposal going forward. And so, and then as we talk about the heart of the city, we've had a presentation moving on from that, and they're in conjunction is that whole area, and we had a report from the RSP group on that, and I think what was mentioned earlier, there is that feeling, there were two things that came out from their surveys where they walked around downtown and elsewhere. Visitors want something that, in their word, was distractions, not just entertainment, but something that maybe distracts them from what they're doing either at Mayo or elsewhere. Folks in the community want to be included, and we hear that different times about, well, as everything is going for somebody else, no, there will be things for that as well. So that project is, I think the last presentation we had, which was a few weeks ago, that task force that's working on that, the heart of the city, was very pleased and excited about the progress that's being made on that as well. So open to any questions.
I would add on to one thing. When this was, a presentation was made on both of these to the council as they were to you at your last meeting. One of the things the mayor and council ask is that on the Chateau, we check into what's the best form of governance, what are funding options, and then also for both projects, they wanted to make sure that there was coordination between the Chateau study and the heart of the city work, because that's adjacent to it, and there's also some development projects adjacent to it. So they wanted a coordination, a very coordinated approach, and we'll be working with the EDA staff to ensure that that is looked at, and all those groups are working together to get one piece that fits well together. Different pieces fit in one collection there.
Mr. Campbell.
I'm extremely pleased that you added those last comments, because very candidly, that's one of my concerns as I look at the Chateau, and The Chateau is near and dear to my heart because my wife and I spent a lot of time in the balcony when we were in high school.
Oh, we'd love to know more about that.
There are certain preservation aspects about the balcony. No,
And it will have a balcony again, too.
but the reality of it is, I sort of view the Chateau as potentially the front door of a broader, a much more visionary expansion of the space behind the front door. And I've seen some concepts that have been developed by some developers that are really exciting. It's not just taking the space that's there and cramming in as many seats as you possibly can, but like I say, making it the front door of something that is visionary, that's exciting, that takes into consideration all kinds of activities behind that classic front door. And then what you said, I think, is really important, is that you take into consideration the adjacent properties, the bank, the right and the left, to assure that that front door is a piece of something that really does make the heart of the city something extraordinary. And so I hope we don't just keep our blinders on and say, you know, we're going to paint the sign and we're going to put more chairs and we're going to be able to seat 140 for dinner or whatever it is. I want a vision of something that's really exciting, that's going to help develop probably the critical part of what happens in the center of the city.
The Chateau is probably the smallest project that's going to come before us, and I think, as I would reinforce what Mr. Campbell said, probably the most important. And, you know, I was so excited when the city stepped up and did this. And I have to admit that I had a pretty big gulp when I heard $21 million. Just as having followed as a reporter mostly all the State Theater and all those other things in Minneapolis and mindful of what's going on in Duluth and all of that, there's no one way to skin this cat. And I think, you know, just one piece of advice I would offer on it is it's important to sometimes separate the building from the experience. Meaning, when you get into these building discussions, and I've unfortunately been through a lot of them, you keep going through these laundry lists of all the things you could do in the building, period, in a vacuum. And yet what you really need to do is you focus on what are we trying to do here. And what I would recommend is trying to do is the idea that when someone lives in Rochester, one of the reasons they want to be here is because almost every night there's some great way to expand their sense of art or knowledge or whatever in this building. When a visitor comes, that's something. When somebody's going through a horrible medical trauma, there's something to uplift them. And that separates from whether the floor can have an electronic rake or not. You know, and so I'm not saying whether to or not to do that, but I'm just saying that while doing that, I just recommend keeping that experience in front. The idea of one person doing a reading is not an expensive thing to do, depending on the programming sophistication of that, because that person doing the reading could be Tom Friedman, who just had a big event up there, who didn't need anything fancy other than a great place, or on and on and on and on. So I just encourage you to think as much about programming as the physical piece. I know you are, and I just want to just really underscore your leadership and how important it's been, Mayor Breedy, because I know there's something really near and dear to your heart. And just one of the ways these things happen is if the mayor just digs in and loves it enough, you know, and so we'll try to give you the wind in your sail you can to the degree that we have a role in this. Other thoughts? Okay, very good. Let's move on to, are we done with you guys? Not that we want to necessarily, but are you, let's go back to my agenda here.
Your agenda.
Yeah, well.
There's one more item.
One more item we need from you. Okay, St. Mary's Place. Thank you, Patrick.
I might, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I just might.
We didn't go the heart of the city physical place yet. Okay, good.
So I just may report that progress continues to be made on the public realm work that is going on, led by the RSP team, and we have no action before you today, or no formal report other than to let you know that we continue to be on track, and they will be prepared to come in January with a more formal update and perhaps some directional discussion.
Anything else on that? Okay. Moving on to St. Mary's Place.
Again, this is not in front of you for action, but I think important for you to see the progress that we have been making, we, the city of Rochester, and ourselves, along with the community and a group of stakeholders around thinking about the public realm around St. Mary's. This was largely triggered, as Mayor Ryback, you mentioned, by conversation about what is the place that is being created in the area of St. Mary's. And so just for a point of reference, I'm going to walk through about 10 slides, but just for a point of reference, this is Highway 52 on the left side of the screen, and St. Mary's Hospital in the middle of the screen, the middle bottom of the screen. So this is the area that we have been addressing, and the A.Alatus project that you just approved is sort of midway on the screen. Again, for a point of reference, 2nd Street down the middle. The aspirational imagery that was part of our development plan is this picture. This is facing east from roughly 11th facing east. Again, aspirational, with certainly a lot of thought behind it. Understanding this is our current condition. Now, I said facing east, but it was actually facing west. This is facing east. This is our current condition and gateway as we enter the #1 hospital in America. So a key group, a group of stakeholders along with city partners and ourselves have been working on thinking about what could this place begin to look like over time as investments are being made. And there are several concepts that have begun to emerge that we think will begin to shape a final plan. This is not the final plan. But the concept, and I'm just going to briefly talk about each of these, the concept of a subway connection, this showing imagery of a north-south connection. But importantly about that are these, what we'd say, describe as sort of grand entrances to that subway, so that people can easily enter or exit the subway and get back to the street level, but when needed, use the subway to get out of the weather and to get under 2nd Street. To St. Mary's, yes. An idea that has emerged because of the interest in climate control and weather protection, an idea has emerged about a street-level arcade system that could provide weather protection, could be built into new developments, could be part of the public realm, that really connects all of the properties east and west to that ultimately north-south tunnel. The idea of frequent and prominent pedestrian crossings. Again, this image shows the many potential places that we could create comfortable street-level crossings. Recognizing the importance of a street that functions for traffic flow and will be prepared for the eventual transit mode shifts that will be taking place and technology that will be used, but pedestrian-friendly streets. This being an example of a street section that starts to show how we can accommodate traffic and transit, walking experiences, outdoor cafes, the covered or the arcade system, all within the street right-of-way as it develops over time. The need for prominent transit nodes with shelters. Strengthening the east-west bicycle connection. During this design process, we did undertake a prototyping sort of demonstration experience by having bikes available at the downtown campus of Mayo and the St. Mary's campus, and invited people to use a bike and experience the ease or discomfort of biking that distance. And the importance of gateway features, public art, signature sort of neighborhood identity to really signal the place that this district is. And some imagery around the importance of north-south connections into the adjacent neighborhoods, whether they are pedestrian plazas or green streets, but really connecting the neighborhoods to the north and south more comfortably to that Second Street corridor. So we share these to let you know the progress that's being made, the conversation that's happening in the city, and as we advance the A.Alatus project, it is being designed consistent with these emerging themes. So the idea is that each project contributes to this larger vision. With this slide, I just indicate that there is other work going on, city's comprehensive plan, of course, the transit and circulation study that's being done. And there is a more intensive study of a more complete subway system to fully understand what the cost and maintenance would be required of a more complete subway system. So again, this isn't here for action, it's here for information and response or comment or questions. And of course, Gary and Terry would be prepared to comment as well.
Any comments? I'd like to just say thank you. I mean, I think this is the kind of work that is not going to get the headlines, but it's going to change the experience and improve the experience, and I think is really good. So I appreciate that. And it's been interesting that during my time on this, some of the most interesting comments I've gotten have been emails from people in that community talking about not a building, but a district and some of these elements that make the experience better. So I appreciate the work that you and I think the community is doing on this. Anything else? Okay, let's move forward to the budget year today. Mr. Beer, do I turn to you on this one?
Sure. I won't bore you with reading the pertinent numbers are on page 51 and 52. You can read them for yourselves. We're well within the budgets. If you have any specific questions, either I can attempt to answer them or my esteemed colleague, Mr. Martinson. I see him back there in the audience. Otherwise, things look good. We have a little money in the checkbook, so we're good to go.
Boring on the budget is good.
That's right.
Any other comments? Good, thank you. Do we take any action on that this time? Okay, good. We'll move on to the regular meeting schedule, as I mentioned up top. As the chair asked me to do, we are going to be moving to 4 meetings a year as opposed to 6. That means the meetings will need to be more impactful. I think also I heard at least one comment, I think it was from Mr. Beer on this, but about the idea that if we need to be pushed, if we need to be called together, if something is happening, do it. And, you know, I think that's the sort of spirit we want to put this in. So we're going to put 4 meetings on the calendar, but we're also going to put everyone on notice that we want to work and we want to move things and take that action within all of that. Again, no action on that, right?
Motion and a second.
Motion, okay. Would somebody move
Second.
Well, let me wait for a motion first, or how would you like to move it then? Very good.
I'll move it.
We're all set. Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Very good, okay. We're done, right? We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Next second. Thank you very much. All right, here we go.
Next meeting is in January. Merry Christmas to everybody.